Good morning and welcome to our Truck Regulation Advisory Committee kickoff meeting. I'm Jerry Baruman with CARB's Advanced Clean Fleets Regulation Implementation Team. The purpose of today's meeting is to have an open discussion and propose measures that could help with implementation of the ACF regulation. Today is not a forum to propose changes to regulatory language. I'm joined at the presenters table by my colleagues from the implementation team, Jimmy Steele, Branch Chief Tony Brazil, and to his left, Infrastructure Specialist for the Mobile Source Control Division, Annalisa Bevan. To her left, we have Branch Chief for the Outreach Team, Anne-Marie Rogers, and Bruce Tudor. And we also have Jessica Johnston from the Drayage Team. This meeting is scheduled to end at 12 p.m. and is being recorded. A copy of the presentation is online and the recording will be made available on our website after this meeting. For those attending in person, restrooms are located out the back doors, behind you and to the left. And if there is the event that we have a fire alarm, please remain calm and listen to the instructions given over the speakers. If we are asked to evacuate the building, please go downstairs, do not use elevators, and head across the street to the Cesar Chavez Plaza Park. Please let one of our CARB staffers or building security know if you need assistance with evacuation. All right, now I'll turn it over to Jimmy Steele to walk us through today's presentation.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jimmy Steele, and I'm an air pollution specialist with the Transportation and Clean Technology branch. I will be walking you through the presentation on the new Truck Regulations Advisory Committee, acronym TRAC, some of our objectives and the proposed next steps. The agenda for today is to discuss our overall objectives, organizing committee meetings by topic categories of interest, what meeting formats we might use, and whether we need to select active committee members to keep meetings manageable and what roles they might have. Our goal is to have an open dialogue today, but we have more than 500 people who signed up. So we will be using some polling questions to see where there may be consensus. After today's meeting, we plan to follow up with you by email on next steps that depend on the outcome of today's meeting. For a brief status update, the Advanced Clean Fleets Regulation was adopted by the board on April 28th, 2023, and is in the process of being finalized by the Office of Administrative Law. We are committed to the successful implementation of ACF and are here to see how we can work closely with stakeholders and successfully implement this regulation. Today, we are starting with the same concept and process we used in the past during the early implementation of the truck and bus regulation and the tractor trailer GHG regulation. We believe it is a good starting point for discussing how to facilitate effective communication to improve implementation for the ACF regulation. The purpose of the advisory committee will be to discuss and develop best practices for ACF implementation. The goal of the committee is to facilitate constructive dialogue between stakeholders and CARB to address key implementation issues and to develop recommendations and action items on areas that may need more attention or refinement. The general concept for the advisory committee meetings that we used in the past was to have a roundtable discussion with the intent to improve participant productivity, seek feedback, and to propose ideas with the goal of finding consensus from stakeholders by organizing meetings by key topic areas. Today, we are seeking feedback on whether we need to identify active committee members and to define their roles. We are planning to record all meetings and to keep them open to everyone who is interested in hearing the discussion. We are proposing to hold quarterly TRAC meetings and anticipate there will be other meetings as needed that will be determined by the subcommittees. Now I will describe potential topics or meeting categories that may help us organize future meetings. We have identified these categories for organizing committee meetings for today's discussion. We will summarize the concept behind each of these and what would likely be discussed in each group. At the end of this section, we will seek feedback on whether there is consensus on some or all of these categories. The topics to be discussed at the Outreach Committee meeting will primarily involve the best methods to inform fleets affected by ACF. We will use our experiences from previous outreach campaigns and lessons learned. We want to improve methods and discuss topics that will focus on the most efficient approaches to reach out to fleets. What information do fleets need? Equity considerations, including how to engage disadvantaged and low-income communities, and ways to leverage grassroots efforts. There will also be a need to review and discuss ACF materials, messaging, and reporting tools to better support outreach efforts and engagement. For the Borders Community Committee meeting, the discussion topics will primarily involve identifying the best methods for engagement with border fleets and to develop solutions to the unique challenges they may face. For example, this may involve coordination with fleet operators in Mexico, border communities, and infrastructure solutions. I will now pass the microphone to Annalisa Bevin to discuss the Infrastructure Committee.
Thank you. We're anticipating the Infrastructure Committee being very much solution-oriented, similar to the work group meetings that we held prior to adoption of ACF, if anybody was involved in those. So we look forward to bringing together folks to talk along with our partner state agencies about things like grid resiliency and reliability, communication with utilities, data collection and planning, and use of those planning tools, as well as what areas we can get involved with as state partners to facilitate getting infrastructure in the ground and operational. Thanks.
Thanks, Annalisa. The Rural Provisions Committee would primarily focus on the exemptions and extensions in the regulation to help smooth the process for applying for and receiving exemptions consistent with the regulation language. This will likely be a little more technical than other categories and will involve working through the specific provisions details and how to streamline the application and approval process. The subcommittee would prioritize which extensions to focus on first, such as the ZEV purchase exemption or the infrastructure delay extension. We are proposing a few meeting format options for the audience to consider. We are looking for feedback on the proposed options that will result in a collaborative and productive meeting format. Following the proposed meeting format options, we will have another poll to vote on the preferred option. Option 1 is an in-person meeting format with all meetings occurring on a single day in each quarter. This will include concurrent subcommittee meetings. All subcommittees will report to the main committee meeting at the end of the day. The goal is to have an active roundtable discussion when possible. Active members are required to attend the in-person meetings. The meetings will be webcast and recorded. Option 2 is to have virtual meetings that will occur on a single day in each quarter. This would be held as virtual subcommittee breakout rooms, and all subcommittees would report to the main committee meeting at the end of the day. All active members would be panelists and have access to the live microphone. The meetings would be online and recorded. Option 3 would be to have virtual meetings that will occur on different days. With this concept, meetings would not overlap, so everyone could participate in any subcommittee meeting. In this case, there will be no need to report back to a central committee. If this becomes the preferred option, we are seeking input on whether or not there should be a central committee meeting. We are thinking that it would be useful to hold subcommittee meetings in the same week for consistency, and none of the meetings would be concurrent. All active members would be panelists and have access to the live microphone. Again, the meetings would be webcast and recorded. Now we will discuss member selection goals, information, and expectations. The expectation for all active members is that they attend and participate in the quarterly committee meetings, including any additional meetings that are scheduled. Members will be required to review and meeting summaries for accuracy and completeness. The expectation is that members will collaborate with other members to discuss and refine the proposed solutions. The goal for active committee member selection is to have a diverse representation of the regulated entities and the stakeholders that are directly affected by the ACF. Members may include fleet owners, industry organizations, manufacturers, subject matter experts, etc. We will also want to manage the number of members to ensure a collaborative and productive committee meeting. We are interested in getting feedback on how we manage the active number of participants. Active member selection will consist of an application process where potential candidates are required to include their name, occupation, and affiliation. Candidates will need to identify their subcommittee preference and include a brief statement of qualifications and a description of why you are a good fit to be a subcommittee member. We request that the statement of qualifications be kept at 1 page or less. If we move forward with this process, we plan to send an email notice to everyone who is on the ACF mailing list. During today's meeting, we will be conducting several polls to get some real-time feedback on a few key questions and where there may be consensus and where there may be issues that require further follow-up. For in-person attendees, please answer the polling question when prompted with a show of hands. Staff will call out results. For remote participants, you will be answering the Zoom poll and the results will be displayed after the poll closes for everyone to see. An example poll question is shown on the slide. Using your computer controls, answer the question, then click the submit button. The first poll for today is to identify the affiliation of our audience. Please select one of the following options: truck owner operator, truck manufacturer, service or equipment provider, community health advocate, or other observer. Okay. For in-room audience, please show your hands if you are go ahead. If you're a truck owner operator. Okay. Molly, do you know how many people we have in the room?
Wait, somebody taking notes? Yeah. So roughly 11. We'll go with that number. We didn't all get the same number.
All right. Next, truck manufacturer, service or equipment provider.
I got 8. 8. Okay.
For community health advocate, please show your hands.
Okay. 0 in the room. Okay.
And other observer.
I got 19. 19. We got 19. Okay. Now, can we do the poll online? Hmm? So this is the first time for us, so we'll bear with us for.
I'll read the poll results out from Zoom. So for a truck owner and operator, we have about 36%, so 123 out of 341 participants. For a vehicle manufacturer, service, or equipment provider, we have 19%, so 66 out of 241. Community health advocate, 6 out of 341 at 2%. And other is 43%, 146 out of 241.
Okay. So that was partly to test and get started on the polling thing, but also get an idea of who's here at the meeting today. Okay, can we go to the next one?
Yep.
So we can't get them, you can't show them online? Okay. So sorry, we were going to try to display it on the screen in the room, but we can't. The people that are participating remotely can see it, right, on their own screen? Okay. So they can see the results and the questions, but I guess we'll read them out.
Okay, we are at our next poll. Select all the categories you think are appropriate for future subcommittee meetings. Select the other category for any topic category that we might have overlooked. Keep in mind that we can make changes in the future if needed. If you are participating online, go ahead and make your selections. For those of you in the room, please raise your hand to indicate which subcommittee you think is appropriate as I read each one. Outreach.
Yeah, well, we'll try to get through this. Okay, but we don't have to be perfect on this. I mean, what's our best guess here? At least 20.
Yeah.
Okay, close enough.
We have about 40 participants in the room.
Okay, next one.
Next one is infrastructure implementation.
Okay, that looks popular. Almost everybody. So how many people again?
About 40.
Okay, so we'll take 40.
Border communities.
So we got 3. Okay,
Rural provisions.
that's a big one. Yeah, it's pretty, that's close to 40. Yeah.
Other.
But okay. Okay, it's more than half. Yeah. Yeah, we'll call it 25. How was that? Okay. Can you just tell us the
Do you want to close the poll first, or should I read the results before it's closed? Okay, so for outreach, we have 52%, infrastructure implementation, 89%,
Molly, can you just tell us the numbers? And stuff?
border communities. Oh, you want the fraction? Okay,
Yeah, just
89 out of 322 at 28%. Rural provisions, 265 out of 322 at
I'm sorry.
82%.
Can you just start at the top? So
Okay, I'm gonna read. I'm starting
outreach,
over.
outreach was 89.
Outreach is 52%. Infrastructure implementation is
Molly,
89%.
Just the count of the
Okay, so you
hands
want
or-
the count
Yeah,
total.
just the count, nothing else.
I did that wrong.
Okay, that's okay. No, it's fine.
Okay, take 3. Outreach, 167 out of 322.
Wow. Okay.
Infrastructure implementation, 285 out of 322. Border communities, 89 out of 322. Rural provisions, 265 out of 322, and other at 66 out of 322.
Okay.
I'm also going to try to put this up on the screen. Let's see if we can do it real time.
Should we go to the next one while she's trying to get it to show?
Sure.
Okay.
All right, we'll do the next poll.
There it should be. Oh,
All right, we have 3 polls for the audience to gather information about active members. Which subcommittee are you interested in being an active member? Please select one option. Outreach. Show hands.
Yeah. 1, 2, 3. Okay, we got 3.
Infrastructure implementation.
Okay, 15 or so.
Border communities.
1.
Rural provisions.
Okay, everybody. Okay, we'll call it 37.
And would you prefer to be an observer?
I don't know. Again, then. Okay. And what did we get online? Oh, okay. So we
the
need just a
poll
couple
is
minutes.
still open. Oh,
So this is active members.
we have 438 participants and about 301 who have answered the poll. We good? Okay, so for outreach, 10 out of 301. Infrastructure implementation, 68 out of 301. Border communities, 6 over 301. Rule provisions, 114 over 301. And folks who prefer to be an observer, 103 over 301.
Cool.
All right, next
got-
poll.
How many do we have to go? 3 more?
I think 2 more.
2 more. Okay, so we have 2 more polling questions, and we'll open it up.
All right, so we're going to conduct a poll on the preferred meeting format. The voting options are option 1, in-person meetings. Show of hands, please.
Wow. Okay, at least half, 22, I'll go.
I'd say 2/3.
Okay, fine.
Option 2,
23.
virtual meetings in a single day.
Okay,
All right, option 3 is virtual meetings that occur on different days.
I got 10. Oh,
Or is there a preference for other meeting formats? Show of hands.
1.
Full results, Molly.
So we're about 300, 301 people are still answering. We'll wait for about 5 seconds. Okay. Okay, we're closing the poll. Results are in. For in-person meetings, we have 28 out of the 306 who responded. Virtual meetings on a single day, 101 out of the 306 who participated in the poll. And again, virtual meetings on different days got the most at 175 over 306. And then other meetings is just 2 out of 306. Good.
Oh, nice. Okay.
All right, this is our last poll for today. What number of active members is the best option to maximize collaboration and productivity? The first option is less than 25 active members. Show of hands, please.
$14, $15, $16. I got 16.
Yeah.
16 on that one.
Next option is less than 50 active members. Show of hands.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7.
Let the subcommittees decide.
Yeah, I got 10.
Last option is no limit on members.
There's 1, 2,
2, 3.
3?
Yeah.
3, sorry.
Online results.
And looks like we're just about done with the online poll. Okay, so results are in. At less than 25 active members, we have 119 out of the 312 who voted. Less than 50 active members at 66 over the 312 that voted. And let subcommittees decide, 94 over 312 that voted, and no limit, 33 over 312.
Okay, for the Q&A portion of this meeting, remote participants, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom and staff will call on you. For in-person participants, please use the chairs near the podiums.
And so we're suggesting for those who are going to speak, we have both podiums presumably are working. And then rather than having to stand in line, you can sit in the front row and just, we'll go from the seated row for any questions that you might have. So unfortunately, we don't have a roaming mic in the room.
And all speakers should, when they start their question or their comment, they should identify themselves as well as their affiliation, please. So with that, we'll open it up. If you want to, in the room, if you want to come up to one of the front speakers, one of the front microphones, we can get started.
And then we can scroll back to any slide or any section that you would like, just to kind of keep it free flowing.
Hi, Lacey Robertson with Rush Enterprises. Are these subcommittees intended to be the format for fleets to ask questions and to better understand how the rule is going to work and what they need to do? Or is that a separate, this is more of a problem solve? Like, what is the intent? Because
I think the intent is a little bit more of the problem solving aspect. So the concept behind the outreach subcommittee is to work through what are the best ways to get information out, depending on what our options are. So I'll use the truck and bus regulation because, one, I've been around for a long time, but it kind of worked before and things changed. So we did have money to do an advertising budget. So when it came to what's the best strategy to use, radio, billboards, pump toppers, all that kind of stuff, the committee was part of helping decide how that would work. It also was a mechanism for us to better work with associations getting information out to their members, for example. And so what we're trying to do is ultimately make sure that when we put out information, we're also putting it in language that people understand and not regulatory speak, if you will. And so having people from the industry saying, yeah, this makes sense, or this is an easier way to explain it, or even when you use a particular term, it has a different meaning in trucking than generally it's general speaking. And so sometimes you don't want to use certain terms and things like that. And so that's kind of the idea behind all of these. So the implementation one for the rule provisions would be to work through, the regulation says what it says, but there's a lot of details to be worked out. And so the whole idea is to streamline things as best we can to make it as straightforward for everyone as possible. And then to get that word out to anybody who's going to need that information, which is going to be a huge chunk of the state.
Right. So I guess I don't know that all of the issues or problems that will need to be solved have even come to the surface yet. And I think that's because a lot of fleets have general questions about how everything's going to work. And a lot of fleets have, as a dealer, they come to us and are confused, and they would like to have some, working groups where it's really, they can ask direct questions, and they really need it right now. I mean, we're less than 6 months out from the end of the year, and no one knows what to do, when they have to report, what they're supposed to do. And so there's a lot of fear and concern out there.
Yeah, no, and we're trying to work on, I mean, one, we are starting to put more and more fact sheets out. We're working through and getting that kind of information out.
Do we think we could have a working group in the next month?
I mean, we have been attending lots of meetings to help people understand how the rule applies to them. Would certainly love to work with you if there's an event that you'd like for us to come to. I'm not sure if you're familiar with our one-stop events that we had for the truck and bus rule, where we would come out to presentations, we would have one-on-one assistance. We're looking to do that again. It's just everything's moving so quickly, but would love to talk to you and see.
And is there any consideration for maybe a webinar or like an online working group that could happen kind of quickly or soon?
Well, we can talk about that.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Trying to balance everything, but yes, definitely let's talk about how we can support you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we'll go left side, right side, left side, right side. You guys can sit down if you prefer. Okay. That's good. All right.
There you go. My name's Frank Harris. I'm with the California Municipal Utilities Association. I wanted to ask a question about the infrastructure subcommittee and then make a pitch for an additional subcommittee. I think infrastructure is keenly important. And so I'm just kind of curious what staff anticipates the infrastructure subcommittee doing in terms of how that might drive regulatory implementation. And then I have a follow-up question after that.
Okay. Yeah, so in our conversations with industry, through our work group meetings and one-on-one, there have been some common themes that have come up around timing of grid upgrades, availability of land and property management issues. And these are things that we'd like to continue talking about and see if there are ways that we can find solutions. And that's not necessarily CARB that is finding that. That may be that it's a team of CARB and CEC and CPUC. But this would be an opportunity for all of the state agencies that are engaged in the infrastructure question to be working directly with stakeholders to address those issues.
Very good. Thank you. My follow-up is, I guess I said as a question, it's really more of a pitch for an additional subcommittee on vehicle technology and applications. To make sure that we have a group, I envision a group that's made up of some users in various high bucket fields, meaning not too granular in terms of the fields, but users in those fields, and then technology experts, battery technology and application, as well as manufacturers. So I encourage you to consider that as well. Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Matt Schrapp. I'm with the Harbor Trucking Association. So nice to be back here in this room with everybody, just like the old days, Tony. So my question is about the other subcommittees. How are we going to determine? We heard a suggestion here from this gentleman. What is the criteria to determine what an other subcommittee is going to be?
Yeah. I mean, at this point, we're looking to get feedback as to what it should be. So as we kind of touched on, we covered some categories so that you have something to react to. But if there's an idea like that one or any other that makes sense to move forward, we can entertain that.
Yes.
And then the other thing I want to throw in there too, it's over time, this can evolve. We could, what we've done in the past, just to make sure everybody's aware, again, when we had a subcommittee, in some cases, like, okay, we need to deal with a technical matter. How about we get like a team of 5 people, go work through that issue, come back to the group, and that might take, 2 or 3 meetings to resolve that, and then come back to the groups like, here's where we landed. And so now we've addressed the issue and things like that. So there's a way to do that. And then in my mind, it's we don't have to get this perfect the first time around. If we see that there's a need for a different type of group, then we can add one. When we did that in the past 2, we started with 4 subcommittees, and then we ended up adding a 5th after about 6 months or so. So we're not set in stone, but we're trying to get the ball rolling in the right direction.
Okay, that's encouraging because obviously, there's 400 some odd people and we could have 400 suggestions from, 6 in the next 5 minutes here potentially. So I'll just throw that in the ring. I feel like drayage needs a special attention, be that it's not constrained by fleet size, it's relative to getting access to covered facilities. The user profile compared to high priority fleets is different. And I feel like it perhaps needs its own subcommittee, or at least subcommittees of the subcommittee across even border communities for that matter. You have folks coming from LA Long Beach going into cross-border activity as well as Port of San Diego, et cetera. So drayage would be my suggestion. And again, whether it's outreach, whether it's grid effect, infrastructure availability, border communities, I think it covers all of those areas. But in particular, because of the regulatory requirements, it's not the same as high priority fleets. It's not the same as public fleets. It has its own regulatory pathway. Wouldn't you agree?
No, it definitely has its own pathway, and there is some overlap in terms of what we're discussing. So I think when we say outreach, it's how do you outreach to all of the different groups that are affected by the regulation. So drayage and the drayage requirements, we've done more concentrated efforts at ports and intermodal rail yards or with the Harbor Association to make sure the information gets out. So I still see that as part of outreach. So to me, that's kind of where I'll ask you the question as to, what, at least in my head, at least what I'm thinking of is like, what's unique to drayage that isn't going to be covered potentially in the other categories? And if it's covered pretty well in the other categories, then I'd say participate in that group with, again, any training classes tend to be more customized depending on the group you're trying to target and the information you're
as was mentioned, the one-stop events, and so was a different animal with the truck and bus rule. The fleet size considerations were, if you're a small fleet or 3 or fewer, and by the time that one-stop events started, that was already in the past, essentially, that you would have to had already been meeting those fleet size requirements. So I just feel that the outreach for drayage operators is not the same as the other rule portions. And yes, we've done a couple webinars on the provisions. I know Jessica, Andreas have joined us, and we're happy to continue that. I just, how much outreach is done at ports. I mean, I've been to one workshop where Heather came down to talk about something that Port of Long Beach put on. I haven't seen a lot of information. We are very close up to this rule deadline, and I just feel that it needs special attention because of the uniqueness of the regulatory pathway. There is no fleet size exemptions in drayage, and therefore it creates a different need for outreach as opposed to just looking at, well, do you have 50 or more trucks? It's like that doesn't apply in drayage. So that would be my suggestion.
I'd like to thank you folks from CARB for hosting the meeting today. My name is James Wheeler. I represent Municipal Maintenance Equipment. We are a unique piece of this market as we sell trucks and bodies to municipal customers and agencies across California. And I think while the group probably did a really deep dive with the OEMs to try and establish attainable targets, I think right now we have a challenge with the confluence of ACT, ACF, and the omnibus rule. To give you guys some examples, the verticals that we work in sewer and water, street and highway sweepers, refuse, residential and commercial pickup, asphalt and street maintenance, debris and homeless encampment cleanup, and fire remediation. And we supply all of these agencies this type of equipment. Currently, beginning January 1, there will not be enough diesel engines to supply these critical pieces of equipment, and there are not electric alternatives available. So we're 100% on board. We want to be a part of the solution. We'd like to be a part of the rules committee to talk about how to make this work. Fact of the matter is we can't let the sewers overflow and the trash pile up in the streets, right? There's got to be a path. Just to give you guys a sense in our business, what this looks like, this would probably take our sales revenue as a company down about 80% without the engines to be supplied. We're a family-owned business. This is our 32nd year in California, and there are many other distributors like us that serve this niche industry who will be affected in the same way. Trickle-down effect of this is if we lose sales and have to change our business, our ability to service and support these critical users will change. And so can we get parts for these wastewater vehicles? Can we provide service technicians? If we have to cut our operation, our ability to support these important customers will change dramatically. So again, we'd like to be a part of the solution. We think this is important legislation that is necessary for the state of California. That's why we'd like to be a part of the rules committee to talk about how to make this work in a fashion that can keep people safe and keep companies like ours in business. Thank you.
Good morning, Mike Tunnell, American Trucking Associations. Good to see everyone here this morning. Thanks for hosting this. So Tony, appreciate you putting this together, kind of repeating the truck and bus format. And, I see this as kind of a plotting process where we'll meet and discuss issues. And I think that's good. But what I think we really need, and I'm just, as mentioned earlier, speaker, was, there's a lot of questions about the reg itself. What does this mean? A lot of terminology that people are struggling with. And with the deadlines coming up, 4 months away, they need to make decisions today and need to know answers, and we're all just interpreting it. So what I would like to see added to this process is some type of quick response team that we regulated parties can go to and ask the questions they need to ask to ensure they their compliance questions and get a response in 24 hours, say. One day. And so, that would be one thing I would like to see you address before we leave today. Is that doable? Can you look into it? Whatever the response might be.
No, I guess, we do have the Zev Fleet email and we are responding to people directly. And we are trying to get more information out so that we can actually refer you to fact sheets to summarize and answer most of the questions that you will likely have. And we are taking the questions we're getting and trying to put and organize them in a way so people can find that kind of information more quickly. And for instance, we put a fleet calculator online so that you can put in what your truck fleet looks like and what the different compliance options would mean for you. We plan to make that better, but at least at this point, it's a tool. And so, and part of it is, we're finishing up the reg process too at the same time, but we'll continue to improve that and expand our ability to do that.
And the tools are helpful, and but then you have the specific questions, and that's what we really need to get at. As that's where the heart of this is. I think is understanding. There's so many nuances in this regulation that people are going, "What does this mean?" That we need to get at that. So thank you for that. And then the other question I had or comment was just on the meeting format. I don't know if the way it was presented, I didn't see hybrid meeting as an option but maybe it was implied, but that would be my one suggestion that, if it'd be nice, it's nice to meet in person, but for, travel or whatever, people can't always attend in person. If they did have online access, they could still be on the committee and participate. So just wanted to say that and sign me up.
And using that as a segue, I'm going to move on to the remote participants. We have more than five.
Let's take everybody that's standing, get their comments in, and then we'll switch to the remote. So
Okay.
we've got 5 more. 6
So
more.
we're going to take a cap at the people in the room right now, and
Yeah.
then once they're done,
we'll
we'll switch
switch.
over to the remote participants.
We'll get back. We'll come back to the inside the room. We just want to get some of the remote ones too. Okay, so
I got a deferral. Thank you. Jay McKeeman, interesting to see a lot of familiar faces. I remember this room a lot more crowded the last time I was here. But anyway, one of the things that I think needs further discussion and organization is the type of fleets involved. There's a variety of fleets in this state. And I'm representing Interstate Oil, by the way, family-owned energy provider in the Sacramento and greater Northern California area. There are just a lot of differences in the way fleets operate and the customers they serve and their access to technology and infrastructure. So somehow we've got to figure out a matrix on this regulation on what fleets meet, what capabilities, both economically and physically, as to their capability to comply. And that suggests maybe differing timelines depending on the actual capabilities of those fleets. So that's my recommendation, that maybe a separate fleet a committee be set up so that we can start looking at the differences, and certainly drayage, fits right into that category. But there's a lot of differences in capability, and I think we need to look at those capabilities as we march down this path. Thank you.
Hi, Matt Zarega from Terra Verde Energy. I'm an independent energy advisor. I work with SLG fleets, mostly water agencies right now. And I'm very interested in the rules committee. And what I'm curious about is this, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the regulation is still with OAL, right? There's no final determination right now, right? So is the rules committee an opportunity to influence the regulation as it's written, or is it an opportunity to talk about procedural stuff?
It's procedural stuff as the rule is written. So, because again, so we specify the criteria, but with the processes, how you do it and how we can streamline things and even put guidance information out that's going to be meaningful to the truck owner.
Okay, if I can zero in on that a little bit. So let me give you an example and you tell me if this is the kind of thing that you would want discussed in that committee. As it stands right now with daily use exemption, if I'm not mistaken, there is one way to interpret that and to pursue it under the assumption for different weight classes of vehicles that there's sort of fixed assumptions about energy consumption per mile. Mm-hmm. But there are very well-known effects regarding like ambient temperature that affects range quite dramatically, like hot temperatures and cold temperatures. And then there's average speed, energy consumption with varies with the cube of velocity, So there's lots of other ways to do it that are mathematically physics-based, it being the request for an exemption under a certain drive cycle scenario. There's other ways to approach it that aren't allowed in the language of the regulation. So I would like to be able to be on this committee and suggest that there's a different way to sort of judge or evaluate exemption requests. Are we going to be able to do that kind of thing?
To an extent, yes, and that's actually an example. So frankly, a good example is with that provision, the regulation has a default value to use for energy usage, but we did recognize that some vehicles' hour of usage is more meaningful, and that there's also a significant difference between an EV when a diesel engine would be idling all day and wouldn't be using any energy, for example.
Pulling a trailer with a Bobcat on it.
And so the regulation does have language that allows for you to use an apples to apples comparison or a test of one vehicle versus another vehicle. Working out some details as to what's an apples to apples is something I think that we need to work through and figure out how to do that, to use an actual test rather than some other method. So I think if we're within that scope of how do we do an apples to apples test for purposes of not using the default values, then I think there's a lot to be worked through on that. To come up with something completely different, completely outside the realm of what's included in the regulation, I think would be possibly out of bounds, but could also be a good way to get to that answer of here's the way you test because this is the way the vehicle operates. This is a test that makes sense for this situation. For an over-the-road application, you would do a different kind of test, and so you'd probably need to work through that kind of thing.
Okay.
So yeah.
And then one quick comment with respect to an earlier question about specific questions about the regulation to CARB. My experience has been when I craft very carefully constructed questions to CARB about the regulation, been very quick to respond with pretty clear answers. So I don't remember the precise email address. If you haven't given it out, give it out again.
Yes, it's actually on the slide deck. But yeah, and again, it's mix and match. It depends on the nuance of the question.
Yeah.
Because Mike was referring to, he gave us a list of 30 questions. We didn't get his answers quickly as he would have liked, and still have a couple more to resolve because his were more complicated. So yeah.
Thank you very much.
Let's take a couple more from the right side. They've been standing a little bit longer here. So yeah.
All right. Hi, I'm Sarah Delorier with the California Association of Sanitation Agencies, which is mainly wastewater municipalities that are interested in being involved and very supportive of the committee and subcommittees overall. I want to be a part of and specifically infrastructure and rule provisions. And like the suggestion that was made earlier, Frank, for the vehicle technology and applications, we think that's important as well. Did have one question regarding looking at the resolution, the last paragraph where it talks about that collaboration being directed by the board between state agencies and CASA and others. Is it the intent for this committee or subcommittees or one of the subcommittees to represent or be, I guess, facilitate that collaboration? Or do you see that as a separate process as well?
I think all of the above is going to fit there. I mean, when we think outreach, it's or at least in my head, we'll let Anne-Marie speak, but my outreach is that we're trying to get the message out to the appropriate groups. And I think if somebody mentions like, hey, if I'm a dray truck owner, I don't need to hear about the other parts. And if a public fleet is using the purchase requirements, then having materials, training, and in person or even online information is going to be part of that. So how do we get the best information out for those types of fleets? I think would fit in the outreach part. I anticipate there might be other issues that might come up.
Yeah.
The rule provisions largely work the same regardless of which compliance option you're looking for. So I see that as multiple fleets that are using different compliance options still would want to know and use the same approach to claim exemptions, for example.
I think I understand that. I think the directive in the resolution is to look broader at the impacts to the implementation of Senate Bill 1383 and make sure that there's coordination across state agencies with CARB on that implementation. And so I wonder if that seems broader outside the scope of the committees and subcommittees.
To an extent, yeah. And again, and maybe this is just the way you look at it. I mean, to me, the infrastructure thing is just about how do you get the infrastructure out there that you need for this rule, but also beyond this rule for people who aren't even regulated, for off-road equipment and so on. What does the state need to do? And that's kind of the spin here for this subcommittee is, hey, we're going to make sure the fleet perspective is being introduced into all of these decision making type meetings and organizations that extend way beyond the ARB. But we're definitely part of the loop and coordinating with the utilities and the PUC and the Energy Commission and so on. And that's another one that's cross-cutting as well.
Got it. So it's part of that, but there may be additional.
Yeah, on that subject matter of infrastructure, but I'm sure there's going to be other issues.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Go to this side.
My name's Tim Wheeler. I also represent Municipal Maintenance Equipment. We're a distributor that provides equipment to a number of critical infrastructures, municipalities and government agencies. I think question and a comment, recognizing that this isn't the forum for adjusting the language within the regulation. I think it's really important for us to work towards prioritizing the interpretation and really kind of nailing down who's going to fit into what bucket. I think we kind of lie at an interesting intersection between equipment manufacturers and the fleets that are running them. And because of that, we aren't a bodybuilder. We aren't a chassis supplier. And I think the understanding at this point, whether it be anecdotal or otherwise, is that California will be supported through this regulation, and chassis providers will be supported to make sure that there is enough diesel engines to support the regulation and allow people to satisfy the mandate. I think one of our concerns and the question for this group would be which committee potentially, whether it's the rules provisions or a subcommittee within a number of the lines of equipment that we sell, we don't source our chassis or our engines in the state of California. And I think the real concern is the availability of diesel engines that meet the mandate. And I think while there is some security that California distributors might have enough diesel engines, we represent a number of lines that are sourced and manufactured in states like Florida, Georgia, Canada, Mexico, just to name a few. And I think the bridge, which is what we're really talking about here when we're talking about going from gross pollutants years ago to ZEV, is just not defined to a point where everybody can protect the viability of critical infrastructure fleets. I think our customer base keeps the streets clean, keeps the sewers from overflowing. And certainly we have skin in the game because that's what our company is supported by. But I think it has to be clear for the fleets and also for us at the intersection, kind of in the middle there. So I guess the question would be, where makes the most sense for us to petition to serve as a subcommittee, whether it be on the rules provision or potentially another committee?
I mean, to be frank, I don't rightfully know. I mean, maybe we could follow up after the meeting and kind of get a better handle on on what that might look like. Because I'm thinking the rules provisions, one of I think the early areas of focus is just vehicle availability, which fits more squarely, I think, in some of those issues you're raising. But I'm not sure if that's the only one.
And within the same vein there, has there been any discussions or any action items teed up to date about the availability of compliant diesel engines in the bridge period here?
I mean, I guess I'll have to take that back because because now it's more than one person who's kind of raised the issue about engines and engine availability, which has more to do with our omnibus regulation setting engine standards. So I'm not the best person to speak to that, but I think we can take that one back and make sure that at least these comments are heard by the team. We're all working the same division, but we're not the group that's on top of that one.
Understood. Thank you.
Sure.
Suzanne Sivright Sutherland, California Construction and Industrial Materials Association. I had a question about the specific topics that would be added and prioritized for the committees and how that would be done.
So I think our approach right now is to kind of establish the general committees, and then kind of based on what we were teeing up is whether we need to manage the size of the active participants. And again, just make sure we don't miss it, is that everybody would be able to listen in. It's just certain people would be active, and we'd either have to be in person if we go with the in-person approach, or would it be like panelists or something if we do the remote or hybrid approach. But I think within each subcommittee, I expect that group will kind of ultimately decide, I think, how to organize, because I think that's one of the basic questions. And then what are the priority topics based on the member participation? So I think that's the first meetings of those subcommittees will be, one of the topics will be, what are the key items to address for that particular meeting, but then also for the next meeting and so on, is to kind of lay out a strategy on how to approach things. Because as you work through some things, then other things become another priority. So I'm thinking it goes to the group and they don't necessarily have to work the same, but we were thinking that it might make sense to kind of say, yeah, if they're obviously going to be on the same day where meetings occur concurrently, then if you want to be in two committees, you might not be able to, or you might not know what happened at the one you weren't able to attend. And so that's where the getting back together at the end of the day to kind of say, here's what all the different groups came up with would be necessary. If we take the other approach where the meetings are somewhat managed separately and don't overlap at all, then you can actually participate in every one. And then that approach might be slightly different. So yeah, but in my head, I'm thinking it's the subcommittees will kind of start to sort those kinds of things out.
And I'd also like to express support for a committee to address vehicle technology and application. I had intended to ask what a topic like EV charger adaption standardization would fit in. It didn't seem to fit in the infrastructure group with those examples, but it does seem like it would fit a vehicle tech.
I think that's
possibly
a
infrastructure
great
tech.
suggestion for infrastructure.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Hello, Mary Alyssa Rancier with Associated General Contractors of California. First, thank you for holding this meeting. I know that AGC has been advocating for an implementation working group for some time and excited to see this to fruition. First, I'd like to indicate our support for the Vehicle Technology Subcommittee group. We think that would be very beneficial towards successful implementation. We're also interested in a potential webinar collaboration. We have collaborated with the in-use off-road diesel regulation and had a webinar on our LMS system. I think that would be beneficial for ACF as well, and we'll reach out and discuss that further. This question has kind of been answered with Suzanne's comment. I was going to ask whether members, active members would only be able to attend one subcommittee. AGC would like to indicate that it would be beneficial if active members would be able to go to multiple subcommittees because they may have expertise in multiple areas and could provide beneficial comments in each of those committees. So that concludes my comments. Thank you.
Good morning, Rebecca Shanker, GNA, now a TRC company, and thanks so much for holding this and starting to really move towards what implementation looks like for all of us here. I work specifically with our fleet clients on regulatory compliance and planning, and I wanted to just ask a few quick questions here. In terms of the suggestions that might come from the committees, are there resources being allocated to kind of developing solutions, tools, like the kinds of budget allocations that might go to specific outreach, kind of thinking about not just, hey, answering a question as we email you guys regularly and get those responses, but really thinking about the tools that folks need to comply. This is so much different than buying a new diesel truck or putting a DPF on, right? I think one of the questions is we can calculate our fleet targets in terms of turnover, but how we get there is still a question that so many fleets can't begin to answer and don't even know how to start. And so really thinking about solutions, not just FAQs. And I'd like to propose that there's some sort of a kind of tools approach there. I don't know if that fits into a committee, but understanding what the budgets might be to get those recommendations from committees, because there will be a lot of those sorts of tool needs that we see. The other one to bring up is we heard a lot of questions already today about omnibus. There's a number of other rules that are rolling out at the same time that overlap, and wondering if there's a committee to work together to integrate, to plan, to have those conversations again across different groups that also includes enforcement. We've really seen that. I'm thrilled to see the rule development folks talking about implementation. I think that's new, that's positive. Our question also is how this plays out when it's such a different process than any previous rule when we start to talk about enforcement. And is enforcement going to be part of these committees? Or is there going to be a role for committees to say like, hey, this aspect of implementation has been a challenge. And when you run into this in enforcement, you might want to consider X, Y, Z. Just wondering what the integration would be there.
Hi, Rebecca. So one tool we have, and we don't have a budget yet, but we are putting stuff together. We did just launch the Cal Fleet Advisor that's being run by CalSTART, which is technical assistance, hands-on case management for fleets who don't know where to start. So it's not necessarily explanations of how the rule affects them. There's some brief highlight or high-level understanding, but it is really about what utility you should be working with, what kind of truck do you need, where to start in that transition. So we have a little pilot working to support 500 fleets this year, but we do plan to scale that up, and it's been very successful so far, but we're still learning. But we do need a budget for outreach. So yeah, I haven't put together any resources yet, but we do have we're transitioning our diesel hotline into support for ACF. So there will be a call center available too. But if you have ideas for tools, I think that's what the outreach committee and some of these other committees can come up with.
And then the question about enforcement.
The question about
other rules.
So yeah, other rules. I mean, today we heard the engine question. So yeah, I guess I haven't given too much thought yet to other rules because we want to make sure we get all the information out that we can about this one. Because again, every fleet is different. In terms of the enforcement question, generally, no, the intent is not to necessarily include enforcement as part of this, because what we're trying to do is figure out how to work through some of these things so that when we did as much as we could in the regulation to say, hey, if a vehicle doesn't fit the application or you can't buy it, then by rule, we're going to give you an exemption. So you don't have to deal with enforcement because we've worked through the issues. And so the idea here is to streamline that so that we don't have an enforcement situation.
But we're looking towards the end of the year with 3, 4 major rules kind of hitting all at the same time.
Yeah. No, and that doesn't mean that we can't have enforcement come and participate in a meeting, put that on the agenda for whatever we might want to discuss, for example, especially as it pertains to the topics that the group is trying to address. But yeah, so, I guess it's an open question, but right now, at least my initial thought was that no, the purpose is not to involve enforcement, because our idea here is to try to provide all of the solutions and tools so that people can make their best decisions and comply with the requirement, including taking advantage of the provisions where they were crafted to make sure that any one fleet wasn't put in a situation where they couldn't comply. So we'll make sure all that works first before we worry about those other things, I guess.
Except that everyone's making purchasing decisions now to try and figure out.
Yeah, well, I guess I'll throw out, the question sometimes has come up, as you might have known, is like, hey, what's the penalty going to be? And it's like, generally, it's going to be big enough that you don't want to be out of compliance. So that's the way we'll approach it. So we don't want anybody to be out of compliance.
Yeah, and I think otherwise, I also want to say I'm very supportive of the technical committee, a drayage committee, and a 1383 committee. We see the need for all of those, and then kind of a solutions-oriented approach for all of this. So thank you.
Okay, so we'll take the last two in the room, and then we'll go to the online for a bit, and then we'll go back.
First of all, I'd like to thank everyone for bringing this together to a forefront. I'm one of the older members to talk today. I represent municipal maintenance equipment. I started the company 32 years ago. I've been involved with the Clean Water Act from the very beginning. I was on the Stormwater Task Force at the very earliest side. I've been representing city, county, state governments, providing equipment to them for 50 years, both with my company, with another company. We have a reputation of delivering quality equipment that meets the standards, meets the requirements, and we have grown through the evolution of clean water, clean air, et cetera, et cetera. So we adopt the idea of clean California and getting good air measures because it's the right thing to do. The transitional period between today and the implementation of the rule for electric has been thought clearly throughout a viewer that apply to the bigger fleets and the less specific application products. There are representations of the numbers of electrified vehicles that will fit applications represented in your overall view, but there are certain select groups that don't have a transitional period. The engineering, the design, the development of products, the platforms to bring these trucks, this equipment to the market isn't there yet. Every manufacturer we represent is gearing up, trying to get there, but it's chassis dependent, it's engine dependent, specific dependent. And since we represent not just Sacramento, we have locations throughout the state of California. Every large fleet within the state of California has dependence upon us for service support and take care of them. So what I asked is that the consideration of a bridge to this zero emission vehicle is given serious thought and serious understanding of the infrastructure that's there for the development and the build of this equipment. And I do again, thank you all for making this public forum available. 32 years this business has been going. My kids are running it now. It's very critical to us, obviously. So thank you.
Chris Shimoda, California Trucking Association. So just 2 comments. Wanted to follow up on Rebecca's comment about having enforcement in the room. Really want to endorse that idea. For anybody who has dealt with truck and bus rule in the past and enforcement, our experience as the regulated public is enforcement is going to regulate to the letter of what is in the regulation. That has been our experience, period. There's a lot of subjectivity in the exemption process in this regulation. There's going to be a lot of discussions, a lot of sort of agreements between program staff and the regulated community. I think enforcement at a very high level needs to be in the room to hear all of those discussions. If we are going to have successful implementation, you say something is okay. For instance, your example of providing the exemptions. Well, enforcement is going to come in and do an audit and make sure that everything was followed to the letter of the law. So again, just to endorse Rebecca's earlier statement, enforcement needs to be in the room during these discussions. Second is now I personally have been involved in these discussions going back to the ACT work group since around 2015, 2016. I will say that we are kind of out of time with respect to answers to very difficult questions at this point. For example, I would tell staff to be prepared to answer questions that have gone unanswered, such as, I'm a small drayage fleet. I have no capability to do a charging project on site. I am reliant upon the existence of a public retail charging infrastructure. There needs to be about, let's call it 100 megawatts by 2025 installed just in Southern California alone for the drayage fleet, around 300 to 400 megawatts installed by 2027. What am I supposed to do? That charging station does not exist. Those are the kind of questions I would just implore staff, be prepared to answer because we are 4 months away from implementation. We are out of time for the theoretical. These things need to be in place for a successful implementation of the regulation. So I'll just close by saying this. So these fleets are extremely busy. They are running businesses. They're complying with a lot of different regulations, as was noted, including different Air Resources Board regulations. If they are going to take time out of their busy schedules to participate in these working groups, the fastest way to lose their attention is to not answer those hard questions. So just be prepared. We've kind of, again, run out of runway here on answering some of these very, very difficult questions. If you want fleets to really stay engaged, there needs to be a serious two-way dialogue about how we make these things work. Thank you.
Okay, so I have 15 attendees out of the 392 that are still actively in the Zoom meeting. So I'm going to call on you by by order. So right now it's Allison Bird. Can you please state your affiliation and comment? Allison Bird, are you still available? Okay, I'll move on to the next person in line. That's Greg Owen. Greg, I've unmuted your mic. You may speak. Let's see, this worked last time.
Yeah, I'm here. So I don't.
So Greg, you're live in the room. You may ask your question.
Yeah, one of the questions I have, and I think Chris Shimoda just kind of covered some of it, but in general, there's a lot of confusion, in all the different areas of concern, whether it's infrastructure, utility, provisio, and everything. Just pointing out, the one truck operator, where's he going to charge his fleet? He doesn't have a place to place infrastructure. In general, is there a proviso for complaints and like making a complaint and just giving the scenario, what the complaint is, what the problems are, what the shortcomings are, and then it could involve any one of the different areas of concern and the different committees and everything, to where CARB would take that complaint or issue or incident, could be an incident, it could be something actively happening, and put it before that committee, to where you're getting ongoing answers and solutions and stuff. I mean, we're staring at a situation that there is no absolute, we've never been given any proof whatsoever that the utilities are going to be able to provide the energy for the consumption that is anticipated with the growth of the EV community. So that is my comment. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Greg. I have 19 participants with their hands raised in the Zoom, so it's 11:15. I'd like you to please state your name and affiliation after I unmute your mic. Allison, I'm gonna try to unmute you again. We'll try this one more time.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, Allison, we can hear you. Thank you. Oh, you may ask your question. Yeah, we can hear you. Good.
Okay. I'm having a little bit of hard time hearing you. So I think that this discussion about enforcement is something that I wanted to bring up as well, especially considering, although we knew the rule was coming, it's not enough to go to your board and say, I need this much money because a rule is going to be there. So right now, I think that, we have some potential issues with timing. And I think that discussions about enforcement would be really useful, at least in the first period. And I am very interested also in some of the record keeping provisions that are in the rule that I think are going to be difficult to comply with over a 5-year period, just because of the volume of them. And so I think there's certain parts of the rule that need more discussion. And I I'm interested in both the rules provisions and the infrastructure subcommittees.
And what was your affiliation again, Allison?
That's okay. I think just a reminder to please state your your name and your affiliation when you're unmuted. So next in line, we have Ron Overecker. Ron, I've unmuted your mic and you may speak. Ron Overecker. I'm gonna ask to unmute one more time. So maybe we lost that window. Ron Overecker, your mic should be live if you unmute from your end. All right. Okay, and just because we have a lot of folks with their hands up. Oh, we can hear you. Ron? Okay. All right, I'm gonna go to the next person in line. So Bradley Northrop. Bradley, I've unmuted your mic. You should be able to ask your question now.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
All right. Bradley Northup. I represent the Napa Fleet Management Association chapter of Southern California. Today, I would like to just touch on the request for other committees or subcommittees required. I do believe that in seconding other comments in the room so far, that the need for a subcommittee to evaluate the technical feasibility of a vehicle associated with the role and assignment that is being performed by that vehicle beyond weight classification and body type does need to be a key element in being successful in this implementation of the regulation, and making sure to pull in the subject matter experts from industry, from trucking industry, from municipal functionalities, organizations like MME or the National Truck Equipment Association, where they specialize in the development of vehicles suited for the job that's actually being performed. I believe that that resource and that subcommittee can bring a lot of technical expertise to make sure that we do have successful implementations of vehicles into the roles that they are identified for. I believe that's all I had to contribute so far. So thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next in line, I'll try Ron one more time. Ron Overecker, I'm going to unmute your mic and you can unmute from your end and ask a question. I don't see anything happening. So you can raise your hand again, I guess. I'll lower your hand. Next in line is Jamie Levin. Jamie, I've unmuted your mic. You may unmute from your end.
Yes, Jamie Levin with the Center for Transportation and the Environment. I will second the need to be able to address through a subcommittee technology readiness. And I think in the very first speaker, there was a reference to manufacturing readiness. So I think both of those categories need to be looked at carefully and also closely aligned with infrastructure. You need both in order to make this technology work. And the second recommendation I would offer is I think the subcommittees and the committee meetings should be less. I voted less than 25 people, but I really think they need to be in-person meetings. You can still offer virtual observation, but to hammer through and work out these problems and solutions and to do it virtually is a lot more difficult than what needs to happen, which is dialogue among all the critical interests. I think they have to be in person, and you can move them around. They don't have to all be in Sacramento. You can move it between the Bay Area, LA, and Sacramento and rotate the meeting schedule. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Next in line to speak is Urvi Nagrani. Urvi, I've unmuted your mic. You should be able to speak after.
Hi, Urvi Nagrani here. I'm currently unaffiliated. And one of the things that I wanted to call out was we've got a lot of people in the room who are paid by somebody else to be there, whether it's by their own company or whether they are a regulated party. And there aren't as many community stakeholders or advocates for improving air quality who are kind of active in this project. And so I think it's really important that we address that, because the point of this regulation isn't to be easy for industry. The point of this regulation is to have cleaner air for California, and that sometimes gets lost. The other thing which I think should be noted is that if you're not being paid to attend this, like I am currently not being paid to attend this, you're giving your own time in the middle of a working day, which is very hard. And I think that if you want to have an equitable working group, you should have some kind of stipends to make sure that community advocates can afford to attend and can afford to go to meetings if they are held elsewhere. Additionally, in the way that HFIP was implemented, where you have eligible manufacturers and eligible dealers, I think it could be useful if CARB considers having some kind of program for consultants or experts to work with CARB and be considered, knowledgeable resources to discuss the problems of creating a plan, because a lot of fleets and companies have a very different relationship with CARB as a regulator, where they might not want to say, oh, this is, where we've been falling short, this is where we could do better, where they might have that conversation in a private business meeting. And so if you had some kind of, here's a listing of all of the consultants who CARB says, yes, they know this rule. If you're having problems beyond what we can just answer in our hotline, hire one of these folks. I think that could help create a resource for folks who have a lot of these more complicated questions and edge cases where they do need a bit more hand-holding on the technology, the implementation, change management, et cetera.
Thank you, Arvi. I think earlier Annalise, or not Annalisa, but Anne Marie mentioned the Cal Fleet Advisor. So that could be a resource for folks who are just learning the rule. All right, next in line to speak is Sam Wilson. Sam, I've unmuted your mic. You may speak.
Hey, good morning, everybody. This is Sam Wilson. I'm a senior vehicles analyst with the Union of Concerned Scientists. Thanks so much for having this forum today. It's great to learn about TRAC and hear what everybody's thoughts are here. I've just got a couple of suggestions and one question for you, for staff. First, just want to second the suggestions for a committee that's focused on technology and market development. It's pretty obvious, where we are in the current state of this market, but there's, so much growth that's forecasted in the near term. It seems like, this is just should be a committee here, and would suggest that it involve industry, manufacturing, and academic subject matter experts. Second, would like to suggest that academic and data analysis resources be made available to the committees, so that their recommendations can be based on the best available science. I think that the success of this rule is too critical just to rely on anecdotal information, and it would be great for there to be some kind of consistency among the different committees in the information that they're relying on. So let's see. So my third suggestion is that the outreach committee include members of other committees, and maybe there be some kind of cross communication between the committees. And the idea here is that so the outreach committee in particular can serve as kind of a forum to aid in compliance. So something, while it'd be great to have like an ACF czar or a truck electrification czar in GoBez or something like that, this could maybe be, I don't know, like a beginning of that in my mind. Let's see. So my last suggestion is that especially in conversations or committees related to drayage reports, similar to a previous speaker, I think that we really need to have representatives of the disproportionately impacted communities involved in these conversations and committees. This is, the impacts to these communities are one of the primary reasons why, where this regulation is happening in the first place. And so I think it's important to include their perspectives here. I just have one question. So, and similar to my last point, the purpose of this rule is to is to mitigate climate change, reduce carbon emissions, and also affect environmental justice in California. But, I haven't really heard anything about climate change or air quality or public health so far. And so I'm just curious how environmental or public health metrics would be considered in the TRAC. And that's it. And thanks so much.
Okay. So in regard to I think the last part of the comment is, so all of the air quality impacts and all of those kinds of assessments were part of the rulemaking package. And so the focus here is to ultimately successfully carry out implementation of the regulation. And so I think to address some of those concerns to an extent, the regulation is crafted, as I think was suggested, to ultimately clean the air. It does lay out, here's the schedule that the fleets have to meet. And that's what we're working towards. But the regulation does have the provisions built in to, again, address situations where a fleet owner would be out of compliance because they don't have a choice. And that's what we're talking about, is how do we make sure that we are, frankly, stewards of meeting that intent and that language as it's written, to minimize the amount of time you need to spend on it and to ultimately share information, I think, like you are kind of indicating, in terms of what is actually available, what's not, where the issues are in terms of the provisions in the rule, like the example of the daily usage provision. If there's test data that you can use, then let's make sure that we put some guidelines around that to make sure that what we're going to end up using is reliable and useful information, as opposed to random information that isn't a valid comparison. So that's the angle of this group, is to get into those details, into those weeds on how to carry out these different steps. So it's not as much about it's not about at all about changing the rule language or the timelines. It's about just making sure we carry it out in a responsible way. Hopefully that covered it.
Okay, so next in line to speak is Nicole Rice. Nicole, I've unmuted your mic. You should be allowed to speak.
Hi, good morning. Let me know if you can't hear me.
I hear you.
Great, thank you. So Nicole Rice, California Renewable Transportation Alliance. I had a comment and a couple of questions. First of all, I just want to thank staff for holding this meeting and coming up with this concept. I definitely think that it's necessary and needed, and certainly going in the right direction for successful implementation. I just wanted to echo and provide support for a couple of ideas that were presented by previous commenters. I do support the hybrid meeting format, as one commenter said, to be able to give as many people as possible an opportunity to participate without having to incur costs for travel and things of that nature. I also want to provide support for the subcommittee on drayage, the subcommittee on vehicle technology, and also some type of forum to address how regulations are interacting with each other, so that the interconnectivity between Omnibus, ACF, ACT, I think that's an important conversation for successful implementation as well. So to my first question, we've been talking about these individual committees that were presented by staff as subcommittee, but this conversation started as a larger kind of advisory committee format. So I was hoping that you could clarify whether we're speaking about the format that staff envisions for this correctly. Is it a larger subcommittee? I'm sorry, a larger committee, an advisory committee that's made up of different subcommittees, or is it something else?
It was actually one of the questions. So it depended on the meeting format. So, but essentially the question was to have a committee with the various subcommittees. And that's what we did when we did the truck and bus regulation and the tractor trailer regulation. We had, I think, up to 5 subcommittees. Those meetings all occurred on the same day. They were in person with, I think, people could listen in remotely, but they were otherwise in-person meetings. And then at the end of that day, all of the committees would get together with the overarching committee and report out as to what the outcomes were of those meetings that occurred. So if we use a similar format, then, and as we laid out, I already forgot which example it was, then that would be the approach. The format that wouldn't use that approach potentially would be if we were going to run the four we laid out in anyway, as separate committee meetings or subcommittee meetings without an overarching committee, with the idea that those would never overlap, so that somebody could participate in every single one if they wanted to, or the ones that they're interested in without having to decide which one to attend because they were concurrent.
Okay.
So that was kind of the idea. So if you have thoughts on a preference, that would be helpful to hear, or if anybody else has suggestions on that.
Okay, that's helpful to understand. So there's still some of that still needs to be worked out based upon the poll that was taken today. Okay. So then back to the subcommittees. They seem very topical, very detailed in nature. So if there are solutions that are put forward that are beyond the capability of the members who are participating, beyond the scope of what the committee can do, how does staff plan to address those issues? And so there can be timely resolution to the suggestions that are brought to the table.
I think the most straightforward answer I can provide is I don't know. I think it's going to depend on what the matter might be and what options we might have, I guess. So it's a pretty open question. As I mentioned before, if in, let's just say in 6 months we determine, oh yeah, we do need a different group or a different committee, if you will, or spin-offs, if you will. It's like this is a detailed area that we can do a more focused work group to do a few meetings on the side between meetings. We can entertain all of those.
Okay, well, I would just like to add to that, and thank you, Tony, for that explanation, that in addition to finding the right participants, as affected stakeholders in this discussion to be part of the subcommittees, I think it would also be important to find the appropriate and specific agencies, partner agency representatives. Thinking of like infrastructure committee, definitely having someone there from PUC or CEC who can help participants understand how to walk through some of the challenges they're having and what can be done by those entities in collaboration with CARB to address some of those issues would be helpful. And then lastly, I just have, I guess, a comment question. So we talked a lot about enforcement today, and that's been raised. So I was wondering if anyone can provide any clarity as to when we might see some additional and specific information that better and provides more clarity and better explains what was in the enforcement discretion letter that was issued. I understand there might have been some FAQs that staff was working on. Just want to know when we could expect to see those.
Yeah, I think we're trying to get everything out as soon as we can in terms of more information. I mean, to kind of put it in context, if it helps to have a number, our plan is to put at least 20 different fact sheets out on the different provisions, because different fleets are going to be able to, are going to need to know different aspects to it depending on where they are. And so, but as was commented earlier, we're finishing up the rulemaking package, resubmitting it back to OAL. So we have to complete that step. That's priority one right today. And then we'll get as much as we can in terms of getting all that information out. And I think that kind of interplays with our outreach efforts, and we are doing other things, but this isn't the forum to necessarily get into that.
Okay, thank you so much. Appreciate everyone's help and responses this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Next in line to speak over Zoom is Sarah Polo-Mu. Sarah, I've unmuted your mic. You may speak.
Thank you. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I'm Sarah Polo-Mu with the California Retailers Association. I don't have any specific questions for the TRAC, but do have some general comments from the larger retail industry perspective in California as the TRAC moves forward with recommendations for implementing the ECF regulation. We will submit these comments via email as well. The California Retailers Association is the only statewide trade association representing all segments of the retail industry, including general merchandise, department stores, online marketplaces, restaurants, supermarkets, grocery stores, et cetera. And CRA works on behalf of California's retail industry, which operates over 400,000 retail establishments with a gross domestic product of 330 billion annually and employs 1/4 of California's total employment. We're a driving force for California's economy, providing essential goods and services to California's consumers, economies, and jobs. CRA or California retailers are innovators in sustainability practices and environmental responsibility. Retailers have been early adopters in the use of technologies aimed at reducing air pollutants and have a history of partnering with CARB to find and implement the use of energy-saving equipment to minimize energy use and reduce carbon footprints. Retailers have actively engaged with CARB for many years, including past partnerships with CARB to explore liquid natural gas options like the battery electric yard tractors. CRA is supportive of a clean fleet transition, but has some concerns about whether current technology and infrastructure can support the implementation timeline. Based on the timeline proposed, companies will likely purchase new trucks by January of 2026, and the existing currently available technology does not meet business needs. While technology is advancing, the industry may not have a solution that fits our members' business model requirements for equipment or infrastructure. Any requirement to purchase current technologies will significantly increase operational costs without supporting business needs. When technology is new, many of the parts for repairs are difficult to find, and in return, tractors or equipment can go offline for several months. Range, weight, and overall length options may be negatively impacted by the ZEV technology currently available. This will require retailers to reduce the amount of product that can be loaded into a trailer, causing an increase in the number of trucks and trailers on the road, adding to highway congestion. Across all transportation, this will increase the number of tractors and trucks on California roads. Many of our member companies are evaluating existing ZEV options. Currently, there is a lack of electric or hydrogen manufacturers with readily available solutions for range, weight, and length that will fit business model requirements. Looking forward, California Retailers Association understands the need to embrace new and cleaner technology and would welcome the opportunity to be a voice in this vital discussion on the industry transition to an advanced clean fleet here in California and being a part of the TRAC. I will submit these as well, but thank you for listening to our comments.
Thank you, Sarah. Next in line to speak is Nick Blair. Nick, I've unmuted your mic. You may speak.
Yes, good morning. Nick Blair, Association of California Water Agencies. Many thanks for holding this workshop this morning. For the sake of brevity, I will second the recommendation to have a vehicle technology subcommittee. Second, the finding a way to actively pass findings and solutions onto the outreach subcommittee, however that might best occur. Second, finding a way to involve enforcement division just to ensure that we understand how they make use of findings, as that might be helpful for compliance efforts. And second, the idea of thinking about how ACF interacts with other rules. A few questions I had. One is, do you have an early sense of how long you envision TRAC operating? And I realize there may not be an answer to that, but do you have an idea at this point?
If I recall correctly, for truck and bus, it went almost 5 years or so, and then really wasn't needed at that point. So I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case here, and if it goes longer, it can go longer.
Thanks. Yeah, that's helpful just for informing potential applicants within my membership of how long they might be volunteering. I guess another question I had kind of on a similar track is, do you have any early thoughts based on conversation today or just in putting this together before having the workshop on, do you think there are some subcommittees where it would make more sense to have more fleet owners, or in my situation, water agency type people as opposed to association representatives. And once again, this is me thinking about how best to inform my membership of, hey, these subcommittees might be of best interest to your fleet manager or this person within your organization versus others. It might make more sense for an association rep to try to apply for.
And okay, so I think part of that answer is yes, in terms of the question of should the fleet owner be for some subcommittees versus an association rep. But I think the answer would also be the reverse, depending on which one. So when we're talking about the provisions in the rule, to me, the objective is to make sure that the fleet managers or fleet owners know where the lines are drawn, if you will, in terms of where vehicle availability and suitability questions need to be addressed because they're making the actual purchases. So somebody who has a high level understanding of purchase practices is probably not going to be too constructive or helpful in getting into those details. And then because the audience for that information will ultimately be the fleet manager. And so I think having fleet managers in the provision like that is going to be really important. For outreach, I don't know that that would be true. An association representative might be more than sufficient. But I'll let Emery.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And I think we're looking for representation from everyone who's affected. So just different perspectives is really what we're looking for on all these committees, I would say.
Yeah, and I guess if that wasn't clear, broadly, when we're looking at if we are going to try to reduce the number of active members, that we would want them to represent different groups and associations and truck type fleets and things like that. So to have a mix so that we don't miss key issues.
Very good. Many thanks.
Thanks, Nick. Next in line to speak is John Lorman. John, I've unmuted your mic. You may speak. John Lorman, I'm going to ask to unmute your mic again. Oh.
I'm going to go ahead and use this opportunity to say, so the meeting was scheduled until noon. I know we have enough hands that are going to push us past noon, but we're going to take everybody's comment that has their hand currently raised. And then after that, it looks like we have enough time to just take a few more here in the room if anybody wants to stick around a little bit longer. So our best estimate is we might go to around 12:30 right now.
And Molly, can you just tell people in the room how many hands raised you still have?
Sure. I have 11 folks online with their hands raised, including John, who has unmuted his mic.
John Lorman.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Molly. John Lorman with Procopio Corian. I just have some process-related questions, not substantive. With the application process, is that going to be just send in an email or mail in an application, or is there going to be a form?
So I'm going to say it's our vision at this point is that we would send an email to everybody on the ZEV Fleet email with information about where we kind of landed, because it looks like there's some consensus on some of these things. And ideally, we're going to have a link to an online form that you can then go in and put in your information. The whole idea is to keep it pretty brief, but just to get some basic information, who you are, your affiliation, who you represent, how you would support the subcommittee. And then that'll give us enough information to kind of say, all right, there's 7 people from the same group. So we really kind of need to limit that to 1 if we're going to get a manageable meeting size. So we'll do it online. And if that online thing doesn't work, we'll just do it in an email and say, hey, here's the email, give us this information, and we'll take that.
Well, a couple of follow-ups to that, and thank you for that. Is there a timing you anticipate by which you want these forms submitted?
Can we flip to the slide, you guys? Yeah, we had a slide. I'm sorry, it's right here. It's on the screen. So the idea is that we would send out this email in September with basically and so we would call it a survey form. So it would basically be a link. If you're interested in being an active member, then here's what you need to fill out. Again, 4 or 5 pieces of information, and that would be it. I don't know if there's going to be, I think we have if we do the online feature, we will be able to ask a few more questions if we need to narrow down anything else as part of that. So we'll have some flexibility on how to do that. And then the idea would be that we would identify who those active members are and notify them also in September, and then schedule the first meetings in either November or December. And obviously there's holidays in there, so I guess early November or early December, but not at the end of November.
All right, last question. In the selection, let's say you do have representatives of interest that there are 5, 6, 10 of them. How will staff select among those 10? What kind of criteria will you use?
I mean, we're going to try to rely on the information submitted in those emails, and try to be as true as we can to the being kind of consistent throughout. I know when we did this with the truck and bus one, again, more than a decade ago, there was only a couple that we had to have conversations with people to kind of narrow the list, because it was, so it was pretty straightforward, I guess, is the idea. And based on the number of hands, it looks like we're going to get like 200 people wanting to lead a group. So that's going to be a problem. If it works out to people actually only applying, knowing that it maybe is a multi-year commitment, if it comes down to 30, it might just be automatic. We might not have to do a whole lot. So we'll have to play it by ear.
All right. Thank you very much.
And I guess I'll leave the opportunity open. It's like, it's possible we say, hey, you know what? There's too many applicants to narrow down in an objective way. We'll leave it to everybody come to the subcommittee meeting and then sort it out there. So whatever works is what we'll be looking for. So, but if it comes out like I anticipate, if it's 30 or so people and the suggestion was to be at 25, is like, we can go with 30. I think we'll be all right. But we can't really go with 75 because it probably won't allow for much dialogue at all.
Yeah, this is obviously a broader impacted rule in some respects than some of the earlier ones in terms of the number of people affected, the businesses and so on. So yeah, you may need straws to draw or something, but I'm sure you'll do a great job at making it right.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Next in line to speak, excuse me, is David Rothbard. David, I've unmuted your mic. You may speak.
Good morning. This is David Rothbard. I'm representing the Clean Water SoCal group, which represents the wastewater community in Southern California. I wanted to revisit Sarah Delorier's question from CASA pertaining to the board resolution. The board acknowledged the importance of food waste diversion away from landfills to get methane reductions, and that's really achieved by 1383. And the wastewater community looks at this as, we're probably the only entity that can receive the food waste. And the dilemma the board recognized was, we need a home for the biogas that's going to be produced. And the board specifically said there should be a group amongst the regulatory agencies implementing all of these different pieces, and the CASA members, as well as CAPCOA. So it seems like it's outside the realm of the groups we're talking about today, and just really want to confirm that with staff, and maybe Tony could chime in on that. But specifically, the board said that the board directs staff to prioritize policy discussions and discuss how to transition biomethane into hard decarbonized sectors, and even a feedstock, produce hydrogen for fuel cell vehicles or produce electricity for fleets. So I just wanted to double check that everyone's on the same page, that there'd be a separate group that is set up to achieve that resolution. So if you could answer that, I really appreciate it.
No, I can. Actually, I'm glad you brought it up because I kind of forgot the answer. There is a group that is being established. It's not being led by our particular division. But it is the same group that ultimately is overseeing the scoping plan and LCFS. And so if you need any details on making sure we connect you, just reach out to me and I'll make sure that happens. But yeah, because we had that internal discussion as like, who's going to be leading that effort? Because it is a multi-agency coordination effort. It's not a ARB specific thing.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and so it's already kind of happening, but I can't give you any more details than that. But yeah, but I appreciate you bringing that back up because that is a separate group from this because it's a completely different issue they're trying to address.
Next is, are you done, David? Is that the last question?
That was the last question I have. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, David. Next in line to speak is Lisa McGee. Lisa, I've unmuted your mic.
Hi there. My name is Lisa McGee, and I am with Tom's Truck Center, which is a medium heavy duty commercial truck dealership. I'm going to kind of provide a little background just to kind of provide some information on one thing I think will be important as it relates to the committee is some EV expertise with real world experience that I think could really bring some of the solutions that we are truly challenged by, not just in multiple different types of sizes of fleets, but in the technology itself. I began my experiences with CARB and CEC and CPUC in 2015 as an airport operations fleet manager. And I adopted the HFIP program as far as vouchers in 2015, 16 and 18, and then began participating in proceedings at CPUC in 2016 due to the CPUC demand fees and rate design that was being part of the programs to support this technology on the medium heavy duty side. Today, that fleet is 100% electric as of April 2020. They've got on average 135,000 miles per each EV, and one bus has 186,000 miles on it. We installed infrastructure in 2015 on our own. We had the fleet medium heavy duty fast charging infrastructure that we won in 2018 by CPUC. We also won the customer workplace charging infrastructure in 2018 with our utility. I went on and moved on and worked with an EV medium heavy duty manufacturer that is in the current space today as an EV. And today now I'm working with a commercial truck dealership, and my job and my role is for EV programs and affairs manager. And it's really to support how we're going to get here. And so I really wanted to emphasize not only the expertise that needs to be part of this committee from the real world experience, but also I also wanted to address some and support some of the other commenters. I do agree with Mike as it relates to we really, really need the opportunity to have a quick response to fleets. There are very specific questions. It's all about the experience, right? And so this is really confusing, really overwhelming, many moving parts, and super expensive and very different. And so without these people being able to be advised and supported with a good feeling, they're getting more confused and more frustrated. And as well as you guys are doing on the fleet, frequently asked questions, it's still falling short of really providing the service that I think is going to really make a big jump to make people feel more interested in going to the next phase. I'll give another example. I think we're still short on the implementation manual for 2023, which makes it very confusing for them to find some of the provisions and understand it better than trying to figure it out by a bunch of updates and links that get constantly changed without notification. So those are some of the experience that I think that I see as when I hear Mike ask the question for us to have an advisory or a quick response. I think both of those things could be a solution. I also highly support the vehicle technology readiness and OEM readiness. I think both of those are critical to understanding how we come up with identifying the challenges specifically by a vocation or by a size of a fleet, as well as a good solution. There are multiple solutions out there, but I think there's a lot of unknowns and values that many fleets don't have today on this technology. I think roles and subject experts is another area that needs to be identified. I also agree with another commenter that brought up some type of oversight. I think no matter what, we need an oversight advisory committee that will outlast this membership committee. that would be, basically developed in conclusion of this membership. Lastly, I'll just kind of draw upon some things I think that are part of what should be involved in the committee in terms of types of fleets or stakeholders. You've got fleets that are either a small size fleet. They're definitely impacted by utilization, access, and funding differently. You got large size fleets, you got public fleets, you got private fleets, and you got nonprofit fleets. And then of course we need to have EV expertise. On the equipment side, you've got new truck dealership sales, you've got used truck dealership sales, you've got rental and leasing dealership sales, you got trucks as a service sales, you've got used retrofitters, you've got new EV conversions, you've got small EV OEMs that are in the vertical market today that have done a lot of the deliverables, are always exempt and self-certifying. And then you've got large OEMs that have no exemptions, are competing with their facility with their ICE vehicles and their EVs, and are certainly impacted by the advanced clean truck rule. And then lastly, you got dismantlers that are supporting scrapping. And that would be my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Next in line to speak is Morgan Mitchell. Morgan, I've unmuted your mic.
All right, thank you. My name is Morgan Mitchell. I'm with a water district in the Southern Valley of California. And one of the main concerns that we have right now, just is essentially an end user, is that we have board meetings to go through budgets coming up within the next week, a few weeks, maybe next month, depending on the district, all throughout the Central Valley of California. And with the way this is being implemented, still being at the foot of operational law, we're needing to consider how we're going to practically implement this moving forward in very short order, what purchases we need to make, how best to be able to make them, especially when a lot of the equipment that we use, frankly, doesn't exist in a practical manner. And if it does exist physically, there's no real way to be able to use it for our needs, which leads us into reading some of the regulation and the exemptions that are on board are practically impossible as far as daily use goes, and it is only able to be achieved if we already have 10% of a zero emission fleet. But that leads us to most people in our situation, we don't have vehicles to be able to create that 10%. So really my question is, do you have a timeline? I know that we've already talked about enforcement and I know that is at the top of your list right now. But do we have a timeline of when you believe you'll have information for us that we'll be able to take to our boards and make well-informed and practical decisions for budgets over the next coming years, while also being able to achieve practical enforcement and implementation of this regulation?
Well, I mean, I can say the information we have right now is what our board approved as a regulation. And so we're just finalizing the process of getting it officially approved by the Office of Administrative Law. So there's no question as to what our board decision was. And because you are representing a public entity, then the compliance option that's laid out in front of you is your default is that purchases made starting next calendar year, 50% would need to be zero emission. So any purchases being made now, which if you're saying you're going out to do budget hearings, that's not going to be for this year.
Well, the budget hearings we're having for now are for purchases made next year.
Yeah.
So any decision.
Yeah. So
no,
yeah, but I mean to be direct, I mean, so our board's made the decision. There's no question about it. It's been taking us about 3.5 years to get to this stage. We just need to finalize the part about getting it through the Office of Administrative Law, which is a normal process. And should happen soon, but I can't tell you the exact date.
Right.
I think yeah.
No, go ahead.
No, and then the other, of course, then in the rule, then the other part of the rule does have the flexibility option to use the milestone approach, which is based on the types of vehicles that you have, which could mean that your compliance date could be in 2027, depending on the mix of vehicles that you have. So, but that's the best I can provide you right now. And we do have some fact sheets that provide that overview of what those requirements are. So you can use those and share those with your board.
All right, appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Morgan. Next in line to speak is Michael Lewis. Michael, I've unmuted your mic.
Thank you. My name is Mike Lewis, and I represent the Construction Industry Air Quality Coalition. And I wanted to, first of all, thank you for putting this together and suggest to you that, we did this same process with a working group, implementation working group for the portable equipment rule many years ago. And it was a very sizable committee, in large part because we had so many different types of fleets and so many different types of pieces of equipment that were being included in that rule. And we managed to work our way through it pretty substantially, even though that was complicated and, the fleets were varied in sizes and types of equipment and applications and so forth. So I don't see that being much different than what we're proposing here today. And maybe the idea of subcommittees is a good way to sort of break down the workload, but I would not want to discourage anyone from participating in anything that was of interest to them simply because of the size of the committee. We had a large committee for the portable equipment implementation, and it worked pretty well. I guess I've got two issues I'm concerned about, particularly today. One is the exemption list and when we're likely to see an expanded exemption list. The exemption list in the rule is pretty generic, and it certainly doesn't encompass all of the pieces of equipment that are going to be exempt, at least initially. And then secondly, when is the process for applying for exemptions going to begin, and how long do you anticipate it's going to take to respond to those requests? And then on the infrastructure question, are you going to be able to get the utilities and your sister agencies to participate in the utility group? Because I think the discussions we've been having with them are, first of all, they don't have anywhere near the sense of urgency that you do about this regulation, and we're getting timelines from them that are really extended in terms of being able to provide infrastructure to the locations where these fleets are housed, and to be able to provide the charging infrastructure. We're talking 3 to 5 years, and that's just a wild guess on their part. So I don't think those agencies are at all prepared to provide the service that's necessary for these fleet locations, because it's not necessarily the priority for them in terms of who they're dealing with for their consumers and their stockholders, frankly. So those are my questions. Thank you.
Hi, this is Annalisa. To answer your question about getting the state agency and the utilities to participate, we obviously will invite the utilities. They've been a very active participant in our conversations to date, and they recognize that they have a challenge ahead of them in terms of meeting the needs of fleets for the installation of infrastructure and upgrades to the grid to serve those fleets. And the conversations that we've been having have been very constructive around trying to figure out how to prioritize that work, how to get the information necessary for them to plan ahead and ultimately reduce those timelines. We're not getting a whole lot of progress in reducing timelines in the 3 to 5 year time frame because they're sort of locked in on utility planning and investments that they can make under their rate cases as they currently exist. But moving forward, we're working very closely with the CPUC. The CPUC is actually heading up freight implementation plant, the FIP, which is aimed at trying to figure out how to deal with the longer term grid upgrades needed to support transition to zero emission technologies across the state for freight and transportation. And that effort is really constructive. A lot of conversation going on with the utilities about how to make that happen, and with fleets. So that's something that I expect we'll also talk about as part of this work group meeting or work group subcommittee. Trying to think where else. Oh, and in terms of the participation of the state agencies, we signed right before the adoption of the ACF regulation in April, a joint agency statement of intent, committing agencies such as the Energy Commission, Public Utilities Commission, GoBiz, CTC, California Transportation Commission, Caltrans, and even Department of General Services. And I'm forgetting one of the transportation agencies, CalSTA, to work together and jointly work with stakeholders on implementation, especially around infrastructure. So that kind of commitment, that gives me confidence that we're going to have the right folks at the table.
Yeah, and Mike, in terms of the other comments about provisions and applying for extensions and so on, I mean, to me, part of that answer is, one, we want to make sure everybody does understand what their options are with the rule to ultimately figure out which path is best for them, and when their actual compliance dates are. And then in terms of actually applying for exemptions where there would be the need, I mean, we're trying to get that information out as soon as we can so that it's laid out. And some of this will be worked through as part of these subcommittee meetings as well. But we'll try to get as much information out as soon as we can do it.
Okay, next in line to speak is Steve Jepson. Steve, I've unmuted your mic.
Hi, this is Steve Jepson, Executive Director for Clean Water SoCal. We represent 80 water wastewater agencies in Southern California and work very closely with CASA. Thank you for putting this meeting and these upcoming meetings together for implementation. I think it's going to be very useful and we really appreciate it. I'll try to be brief on this one issue. I just want to provide a little forecast for you on, and that's the daily use exemptions. Of course, the water sector, the wastewater sector, the stormwater sector have many different types of specialty vehicles that are very challenging to electrify and simply not on the market at this point in time, even close. So specifically, hydrovac trucks, combo trucks, these trucks that provide vacuum and pumping for utility maintenance and emergency response. They are heavily used in the wastewater sector. They're used in the water sector. They're also used in the stormwater sector. There are over 1,100 separate collection systems in the state. There's even more water systems. Not all the water systems have these trucks, mostly the larger ones. And similar amount of storm drain systems. What I'm getting at is that there could be thousands of daily use exemptions coming early next year for these trucks. And I think what would be very interesting to explore rapidly through these committees is a specific use exemption for this type of truck that's used by essential public service utilities, rather than CARB addressing thousands of applications. Anyway, I'm looking forward to future committee meetings. I wanted to make that comment on a specific consideration for folks to think about. And I'll just add, Tony, we're not talking about the number of cup holders on these vehicles like you have humorously mentioned before. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Next in line to speak is Jerry Furdon. Jerry, I've unmuted your mic.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm Jerry Furdon. I'm equipment manager for Sierra Nevada Construction. And my comment is for the board to, as end users of the technology, and it widely noted that it's not available for the applications that a civil contractor of our size and scale has access to yet, that the most critical part of your outreach needs to be interpretation of the exemptions that are available to all of us. And with the comment of you have 20 different fact sheets that are in progress for us to extract information from seems rather daunting just in itself, to identify which one focuses on what helps us the most. There's there's an awful lot of open discussion that needs to happen about this, because we just can't get compliance with what's available to us in the EV market. So our combustion engine options have to be clearly explained to the end users. And I'm not seeing that in reading through 2015.3. It's very, very cumbersome, and we really need your help to clearly and simply, in a common sense way, explain this to us, how we can comply and how we can utilize the exemptions on our way to compliance, because we all are on our way to compliance, but there's just no physical or financial way for us to get there with what's available. And I'll close with just that we're here to help. Use us as the common sense resources to help you navigate rolling out the information, and less of the bureaucracy, more of the common sense will help us as end users be more amicable to compliant in a much more expedited fashion. Thanks.
Thanks, Jerry. Next in line is Brandon Craighead. Brandon, I've unmuted your mic.
Hi, I'm Brandon Craighead. I'm in the feeding grain industry. Right now, based on the current timeline proposed and recent issues with the Nikola trucks, as well as potential future recalls once these zero emission trucks are implemented on the road, the implementation dates don't seem attainable, at least without some sort of consideration.
Brandon, we're having a really hard time hearing you in the room. Can you speak up a little bit, or?
Yeah, sorry, it might be my headphones. Is this a little bit better for you guys, or are you still having troubles?
We're still not able to hear you. And now it's worse. I'm going to go ahead and take the next. We have 3 more folks in the room with their hands raised. So Brandon, I'm going to go ahead and mute your mic for now, and then we'll come back to you at the end. Thank you. Next in line to speak is Laurel Moorhead. Laurel, I've unmuted your mic.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. What I would like to ask CARB staff to comment on is that the Western States Trucking Association recently filed a writ petition challenging the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation, which among other things asserts that CARB violated CEQA by failing to perform a life cycle analysis of greenhouse gas emissions associated with the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation. And then yesterday, the Office of Administrative Law was served paperwork that says that by including additional responses to the environmental comments, CARB is engaging in post hoc environmental review in violation of CEQA. And then it goes on to cite a whole bunch of case law and the California Code of Regulations, and it looks like a pretty solid challenge to the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation. So it seems like a disservice to every person in the room when you pretend like this is just going to go forward, and with the timeline that you've given, when it looks like it's actually going to get kicked back to the drawing board, and people, when they're trying to make these decisions, should know that this is being challenged and that you're likely this is an illegal regulation and the Office of Administrative Law is not going to accept it. So can you comment on that, please?
No, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not going to comment on pending litigation. So, but as you indicated, that information is publicly available. And that's pretty much all I'm going to say. So thank you.
Okay, next in line to speak is Clayton Miller. Clayton, I've unmuted your mic.
Yes, hi, thank you. I'm Clayton Miller with the Southern California Contractors Association, and I just have a question regarding the once the committees are formed, and given that the advisory committee and the subcommittees are going to have it's going to be a limit of the number of participants on each of those. Is there going to be a process for the stakeholders to provide any input during those meetings, or are they only going to be able to listen? I mean, if during discussions something could be added that might be insightful or helpful, or a question comes up, is there going to be any way for that to happen, or is it going to be purely a passive role for all the other stakeholders that aren't on committees? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think I'm going to answer it without a firm response. I can say, I mean, to a degree, I think the subcommittees can, to an extent, make some decisions on how they want to deal with that. I can tell you what we did in the past, and I wouldn't be surprised if we do it here, is to, in essence, do what we did for, again, the truck and bus one, was in essence to say, we had the active people physically in a room, and anybody could attend and be in the room or do the webcast. So the dialogue and the discussion was predominantly by people at the table, but periodically we would pause for any questions or comments from people that were present in the room but weren't necessarily an active member. If we do a virtual thing, then I'm not exactly sure how that works, but so I don't think there's only one approach to it, and so I think we'll think about how to incorporate that, and whether we just leave it to the subcommittees to kind of make those choices, because I think it'll be different in the different groups.
Thank you.
Thanks, Clayton. Next in line is Brandon Buchanan. Brandon, I've unmuted your mic. I see that your mic is still muted from my end. Brandon?
Okay, there we go. Sorry, I had to click something. Apologize. Good afternoon. My name is Brandon Buchanan with the American Bus Association, and we also are working very closely with the California Bus Association as well. Just had a couple of questions for the group. The title of this advisory committee is currently listed as the Truck Regulation Advisory Committee. And its purpose, obviously, among other things, is to assist with the implementation strategies, materials, outreach, increased awareness to stakeholders. But as the ACF rule impacts all different types of fleets, will CARB be creating a separate advisory committee for some of the other fleets that are non-trucks, like over-the-road buses or motor coaches? And then alternatively, if you are contemplating, including other types of fleets, as part of the stakeholder community, should that not then be reflected with maybe a change in title, which would then change some of the check boxes that people might subscribe to in order to receive the updates and notifications? Thank you.
So, no, broadly, we want participation from a wide range of fleets. And yes, we do recognize that the regulation does include certain buses, even though we have other rules that target some buses. As of today, don't necessarily envision that there be one specific to motor coaches, but I think that would be one that would be a category within within a number of the subcommittees that would make a lot of sense. So obviously infrastructure is going to be one of those. Outreach, I think, is the other. But in terms of vehicle availability and so on, I think we could possibly have more nuanced discussions around buses that might be different than they are for work trucks, for example. And yes, the name of the committee, we use the name from before. It was used for truck and bus regulation. Trucks are a predominant vehicle in the general category to use. We could call it the Truck and Bus Regulations Advisory Committee, but then the acronym is not as good either. So, but we don't want it to be, if it's misleading or people misunderstand it, then I guess maybe the outreach committee could figure out what's a better term to use. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Brendan. I'm going to try to unmute Clayton Miller's line again. Clayton Miller. I'm asking to unmute the last Zoom participant. Okay, so we're done. Oh, was it Brandon that didn't? I'm sorry, it was Brandon. Brandon Craighead, I've unmuted your mic.
Hi, yes. Is this a little bit better?
Oh, we're still having a hard time hearing you.
Can anybody hear him?
I can vaguely.
You can hear him? Yeah, just let him say what he had, and then maybe you can convey it to us. I can't hear it.
Brandon, are you still on the line?
Yeah, let me switch to headphones. I don't know what's going on here.
Yeah, go ahead. I mean, we can kind of hear you. It's just really faint, but go ahead and see if we can capture it. If not, we can follow up after the meeting.
Okay. can you guys, hold on.
Meanwhile, we had a few folks that were interested in speaking in the room. There's about 3 of them. So if you guys want to start queuing up. Brandon, you can go ahead and send your comment to Zev Fleet, and maybe they can send it over here and we'll read it out loud.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so we'll take a few more in the room and then we'll close the meeting.
Hey, John Costantino, been active. Today I'm here on behalf of SEEB. First thing, I'll start with positive. The Zev Fleet's email has been very responsive. So I would encourage anybody to send a note in. But if you're sending responses to me, and I know I've done at least 2-3 dozen, and Mike apparently had 30 in one sitting. If there are answers that are been given to people, I would love to see, just post them, take my name off it. Maybe I have the same question. So that's a suggestion for rapid response. And I think that's my second question is, or note is that if we start in November and do quarterly meetings, a year from now, we're going to have 3 meetings. And that doesn't seem like it's quick enough, especially for outreach, when so many decisions are being made right away. I get that a 5-year run is really going to be helpful for infrastructure. A lot of stuff is going to build on itself in the FIP program and all the work that Annalise has been doing. But as we've heard today, there's a lot of decisions that need to be made and a lot of answers that need to be thrown out there. So that's kind of my question is what is, let me just back up. I'm not sure what the goal of this group is. Is it to get answers to people? Is it to solve intractable problems? Is it to make a report to the board? Are there decisions going to be made in this group? I wasn't part of the truck and bus, so that's my first question: is what's the expectation of these groups? Can that be answered?
Let's say if Anne-Marie, you want to maybe describe what we did for outreach, I think that's probably the easiest one to understand. And even just what happened with truck and bus a little bit, if you're in a position to do that, you're not. Oh, okay. Darn it. Yeah. So, okay, but.
So, I mean,
let me try to answer part of it. I mean, our objective here is to make the implementation better and smoother. So in terms of outreach, I mean, I'm going to try to use that one. So what the TRAC committee did was different things. And so at one point we did have money for an advertising budget. And part of it was like, hey, what's the best way to use this money to get the word out? In the early stages, it was grassroots kinds of things, working with associations, getting them information to put in their letter. And their letters to their members to get out information about the regulations early. And then even like some of what the posters said and the postcards and the different messaging, even what the pump toppers ended up looking like were influenced by the committee. I know a number of people here were part of that. That's what I'm remembering, but it was quite some time ago. And so there was things like that. Infrastructure more broadly is get everybody rowing in the same direction, make sure the fleet perspective is reflected in all these different decisions that are being made by all these agencies. So we're not leading that effort. I mean, other people are, but we did it sort of to give you some context. When we started with the innovative clean transit regulation, we got a lot of the fleet managers associated with the transit buses going to the CPUC proceedings, informing them of when decisions were being made that ultimately affected their rates and how much money would be allocated for infrastructure support and all of those kinds of things. And without that participation, I think the outcome would have been a completely different outcome. And we literally co-held some meetings with the PUC and the transit agencies and so on to meet the PUC's process. And all of that led to, I think, where the funding allocation for infrastructure was laid out for a 5-year timeline that benefits truck owners as much as bus owners. And so if that process didn't exist, it's hard to predict where we'd be today, but I'm assuming we came out in a better place because of it. And so there is no specific report to the board. In terms of the exemptions and provisions, it's like part of the approach, I mean, we're going to try to put out as much information we can, and I'll give an example. We put a fleet calculator out now. It's very basic. It's somewhat helpful, but in the past, we put out one, and based on the comments we got from industry and people who spent the time looking at it, it's like, this would make it so much better for everybody else. And then we modified it and made it better. And so that's what we're looking to do. And so we're looking at the provisions. Here's what they say. There's some leeway in terms of some basic interpretation, or like we were talking about earlier, how you do an apples to apples comparison. Let's put some guidelines around it. Let's sort that out so that when somebody does it, they're not doing it for no good reason, or doing it in a way that's not going to be useful for ultimately answering the questions we need to answer, and things like that. So
if I showed up at one of these in November, is it CARB led? Is the CARB going to set up an agenda? They're going to put out the listserv. They're going to run the meeting, and the stakeholders are there to just have input. And then at the end of the meeting, is there an action item that CARB's going to do? I'm just trying to understand, is there follow-up? Is it majority rule? I just don't know what this is and what this looks like. And, SEEB recommended advisory committee for technology readiness, vehicle availability. Is that part of this at all? And my final question, then I'll be quiet, is are any of the questions today, are there any decisions about enforcement or number of committees, the other committees? When will we know all those answers? Thanks.
Well, that was too big of a question. When we know all of the answers, I don't know for sure. But our intent is to at least lay out, here's where we think we landed based on today and what these first meetings will look like. I think some of these things might evolve. And like we even talked about the enforcement thing. As of today, I don't see that we're going to have a subcommittee meeting just on enforcement. Will enforcement be at meetings for when different topics come up? I think we can make that happen as appropriate. In terms of your broader question, yes, it is. So one, we're gonna have to stay within what the regulation specifies. And at the end of the day, it's on our heads to make sure we carry that out correctly. As far as I'm concerned, we work super closely with enforcement, and the whole part of the reporting and the exemptions that we provide will be actually noted in the system, and enforcement has that real time in the field. So they know that somebody's been granted an extension or not. They will help us ultimately verify that the information that was used is accurate to justify the exemption, for example. And then the way we did the committee meetings in the past is we had a chair and a co-chair, and I presume, but again, we'll leave that to the subcommittees to sort that out. And then we've only got so much that we can do given what the situation might be. As we mentioned with Truck and Bus, we did get a budget for advertising, and if we didn't have that budget, we would have taken a different approach. We can't invent money, and we can't get it ourselves. And so we have to work within the constraints that we have.
So I guess the question I have is, if you go to a meeting and party A thinks this should be the way it's done, and party B thinks it should be interpreted this way, or the two people what's the resolution on that?
Ideally, it's a consensus. And when we look at interpreting rules, our basic default is like if there's ambiguity in terms of the way you can interpret it, we generally interpret it to the advantage of the fleet owner as a guiding principle. There are some things it's like, oh, I think this means this. Like, no, there's no chance, no lawyer would agree with that. And so there's no debate there, even if there's a disagreement. It ultimately is, there's that kind of thing happens. But for the most part, we're looking to do consensus and to ultimately provide us the feedback and input so that what we put out is also more useful to people.
Thank you.
Hey, good afternoon. Sean Edgar, the Director of Clean Fleets here in Sacramento. So when I started appearing in front of the Air Resources Board, my goatee was about as dark as Mr. Peruman's hair. So for the last 23 years, I've had the fortune or misfortune to work on all the diesel risk reduction plan measures. So a couple thoughts I'll share with you. I think goal setting, we should have number one, clarity, number two, consistency, and number three, from TRAC, you should be able to have clear note taking to be able to identify possible amendments or how to make your zero emission truck measure a little bit better. And what I mean by that is, the plan, if I understand from the April board hearing, was to come back before the board to capture fleets that are smaller than the thresholds in this regulation. So those would be a couple things of goal setting. And then just, if CARB wants early action, then really the early information is really needed now. So I'm grateful that we're having a meeting, but going back to John's comment on frequency, we should be doing this at least every month until we get kind of our hands around it and being able to give fleets some clarity and some guidance. So I'll take a quick walk down memory lane because I was intimately involved with truck and bus rollout. 2008 it passed. TRAC was formed in 2009. I was one of the original TRAC members. I don't recall how many years it ran, but it ran for a couple of years. And so that was really helpful, I thought. And we identified a couple things along the way. Number one, shotgun approach as it relates to information rollout. So unless ARB is going to be sending your staff to every association meeting and every chapter meeting, you need to go out and hire folks. We took part in that for truck and bus. There are plenty of folks that are environmental professionals that I'm sure would entertain looking at education and outreach. I did attend one of the one-stops recently down in Fresno, and that was helpful. So Cal Fleet Advisor has seems like limited staff, and they're doing it kind of on an event-based basis. But if I look at what happened in the 2011, 2016 timeframe, you sent folks, across the country to get the word out. And I think you've got not just ACF, omnibus, warranty, all the other things coming at you that you probably would need to take a shotgun approach and resources sooner than later, and flooding the transportation community with the information is probably better sooner. So there would be a couple thoughts to share with you. So sprint and a marathon. I'll start with the marathon. Enforcement absolutely needs to be at the table. And the reason I say that is the good example I have for you is, we have a fact sheet for truck and bus that's called How to Verify, and it's changed about 3 or 4 times over the years. And minor things nuances like tow companies were not in there. If you were hiring a tow company, you didn't need to verify them. Then tow companies were added. And I'm still dealing with that 15 years later, actually. The addition of tow companies and it's not your agency, it happens to be a federal agency. So go beyond confusing FAQs that morph from time to time. If we're going to give guidance, hopefully it'll be clear guidance and hopefully it'll be actionable. So that's just one suggestion in the marathon. Clear steps. We talked during the workshop phase for ACF. You had a draft site electrification diagram. I jokingly called that a 12-step program and assured you I've been through the 12-step program and it didn't look like the one I did, but nevertheless, the steps need to be agreeable by the utilities. And utility involvement, I'm talking about investor-owned utilities. I saw municipal utilities there, but the investor-owned utilities, it should be mandatory. They were called upon as part of the key implementers of this to make it successful. I think, PG&E, San Diego Gas and Electric, SoCal Edison, Pacific Power, I think is the other one. I think they all need to be at the table and at every meeting because I think they're such a critical part of the puzzle. So those would be a couple of things on the marathon side. So on the sprint, near-term outreach plan. I mean, monthly meetings at a minimum. There's got to be an interstate and international component to this because once again, unless you're sending your staff out to go out to every trucking association across the country, or Mike Tunnel's group has regular conventions. So business meetings, conventions where transportation professionals congregate, including your 3PL logistics people, because the other suggestion I'm going to have is the supply chain. Among the 20 or so FAQs, Tony, that your group is working on, there needs to be something that kind of focuses on supply chain. And the reason I say that is the nuances of things like the controlling party definition that's in there. That I think this last 15-day change had a little bit of a tweak to controlling party or common ownership definition. But the controlling party, the hiring entity, and how this July 6th EMA enforcement discretion memo, those are all critical things, I think, for the decision makers that need to make decisions now. Those are, I think, the hot button items that I'm fielding. Definitely rapid response teams desperately needed. I've been trying to get some guidance on waste fleet provision, and it's not anybody's particular fault. It's just been a couple months, and there are some nuances that I've not been able to get some clarity for a key industry that you wanted to be at the tip of the spear, but we don't seem to be able to get the answers that we need. Checklists. So checklists that are, once again, 12-step program site electrification diagram. Need to have checklists that are very simple, that even, you got to dumb it down for dummies like me to understand. It's almost like a infrastructure for dummies, vehicle selection for dummies, that kind of checklists that are pretty simple. And then, perhaps a guidance document to go along with that, but one pagers are helpful for most people. And then really dashboards. So the last thing for me, a lot of the business owner clients that we work with manage their business by key performance indicators. And somewhere along the way, and you heard it from the environmental community as well, it needs to be a dashboard that really starts to tick off the boxes several of your board members observed. You need to know, okay, how many projects approved, how many are in the construction phase, how many are electrified and up and running, how many HVIP vouchers have they done. So key performance indicators are going to be, I think, a key thing. And then last thing I'll recommend is just the several of your board members expressed interest in TRAC and implementation. And so I'm hoping that wherever you land on, and I thought it was a good survey to where you land. One addition I didn't see is grant funding and financing. So I didn't see a specific, it kind of flavors it, but I think grant funding and financing is going to be a key piece. So you might want to add that to your list of a subcommittee or somewhere dedicated, because it's not only huge on the vehicle side, but also huge on the infrastructure side. So several board members expressed interest in TRAC. And so hybrid meeting format would be convenient. Maybe the monthly meetings are kind of coincide with a day or two before or a day or two after the regular board member meetings. So board members that are able to attend in person are able to, if they're here in Sacramento, because many are based out of the areas, and the hybrid format, once again, everybody's gotten used to that with COVID. So hybrid meeting format with in-person attendance would be awesome. And timing those to coincide with the board's monthly meetings would be awesome. And I guess I would just conclude by just saying, what we learn here, hopefully, as we document that here and we identify what's moving in a positive direction, what are the successes, what are the challenges, barriers, and I think the board is really going to need that to inform if this club was something like, and I think your LER reporting that you had said something like 7,600 facilities or something like that reported, I think, under the large entity reporting. So if we're going after 7,600 facilities here that possibly electrify where trucks are parked, the huge number that'll be wrapped up in the zero emission truck measure to come forward is going to be critical. And I also heard that, it doesn't sound like it's going to be until somewhere around 2028 that a look back and a reporting element. So I'm hoping over the next 5 years, A, we get it right. A, we get talented, B, we get talented people. We document it along the way and hopefully have a constructive dialogue on what's working, what's not working, because I think your board's going to need that to make big decisions on the next one. But shotgun approach, get resources at it now. More is better than less. So thank you.
Okay, David, I guess you get to close this out.
Good afternoon. My name is David Rentschler. I'm the Fleet Division Manager for the City of Fairfield, California, as well as the Chairman of the Municipal Equipment Maintenance Association here in Northern California. I have several items. However, it's 12:40 and everybody wants to go to lunch, so I'll try to make some of these quick. I want to start with my understanding of what these committees are going to be. The regulation is set. In these committees, we're not going to be debating the regulation. The regulation is what it is. We're just going to try to figure out ways to successfully implement the regulation. So I don't want a lot of time wasted on people that are going to try to argue that they shouldn't have to follow it or whatever. Hopefully, we're going to have some rules in place on that. Yes, no?
I think we want to lay out that expectation for sure. If you're going to participate, this is about implementation.
Okay, as someone else said, we're all busy. We don't need to hash that out. Next, Tony, I want to bring up, you talked about enforcement. You brought it up. You made a comment that fines will be enough that you want to comply, but you won't say what they are. I think that's unfair that you make that comment. Sorry, but I think it is. People ask me all the time as I'm out there speaking on our experiences with electrification infrastructure. People ask me all the time, what are the fines going to be on ACF if you don't comply? I don't know. I don't know, and I can't figure it out. Just start trying to comply. That's usually my answer. Even my own city has asked me, what happens if we don't comply? I don't know. Let's try not to find out. But I think you need to put something out there. I really think you need to do, especially because you brought it up. Do you want to comment on?
No, I mean, you could look at the health and safety code.
You look at the
some information there, but
you look at the health and safety code, and it's a minimum $500 fine for any incident and up to 1 year in jail for the person who signs the documents. I mean, however, if it's a DPF regulation, it could be $10,000 per day per vehicle. So the fines are just all over the place. So then I wanted to make sure that we have diversity in the types of members of each committee. So you have X amount of local fleets, you have X amount of county fleets, you have a state fleet. On the state and local government, it would be nice to have a certain number assigned. If you're going to have 25 members, 5 of them to local, 5 of them to counties, a couple to state, a couple to special districts, a couple to manufacturers. But let's not forget those local fleets, because they get left out a lot of times. And we have some small local fleets that here in the state that really need some representation. And the special districts as well. Then I wanted to bring up the collaboration. There's been a lot of talk about collaboration, CPUC, CEC, and on the infrastructure side, I really think you need the air districts involved, because there's such long time delays to get our permanent infrastructure in, that when we go out and we convince our boards or our city councils to spend the money to purchase this temporary infrastructure that could also be used as backup power, and then the local air district doesn't want to give you a permit, we're not going to comply with the regulation, and it's going to be because of the local air district. So when you're collaborating, please include the local air districts, because what they told me was that's mobile source and we have nothing to do with that, and it has no bearing on our ability or our willingness to give you a permit on stationary. They go hand in hand, because it's going to take 3 to 5 years to get infrastructure in. And if we can't get it in and we come up with another way to be able to charge our electric vehicles, but then the local air district won't let us, that's not fair. And then I wanted to just quickly finish up with the committees. I have a couple of suggestions. I would suggest that you do a reporting and record keeping committee, because of the extreme volume of paperwork that's going to be in the first year. All of the initial reporting, all of the exemption requests. I really think you need a committee to help steer that every month for the first year. I do agree with others about the technical committee. And I think the funding committee, or funding and grant committee, would be extremely important. And that might even tie in with the outreach. I'm not sure. and trying to get that information out of what's available. And that would really help folks, at least from some of our members in MEMA, the smaller cities that have no idea about infrastructure funding mechanisms that are out there and how that can help them. So I would like to thank you for the time. Thank you for the opportunity for all of us to have a voice in this, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.
I'm just going to read Brandon Craighead's comment real quick. Based on the current timeline proposed and recent issues with Nikola trucks, as well as future recalls that will be faced once trucks are implemented and on the road, the implementation dates do not seem attainable, at least without the consideration of a blended approach. More time is needed for implementation. Has any solution been taken into consideration that takes account electric, hybrid, T4 diesel, and RNG/CNG? That there's a drastic increase in cost for ZEV trucks and incentives to leave a large gap for the purchaser, not including the millions for infrastructure. The time frame needs to be pushed back at least until there are reasonable ZEV options on the market and the infrastructure can support the regulation. There also needs to be consideration to offset the increased cost of implementation to avoid increased trucking and transportation costs on customers throughout industries. And that's it.
Okay. So those comments have more to do with the rule than I think what we're trying to achieve here. So I'd say look at the record in terms of what was in the board consideration and the staff report. So with that, I know people want to go to lunch. So if there's, we can follow up after the meeting, I guess, if there's additional questions. So thank you all for participating, and then we'll get the information out as kind of we laid out. We're shooting for September. We'll put out an email and or a survey type thing to submit information back to show your interest. So mull it over, and we'll include in there any changes in terms of the proposed approach, and then see how it goes from there. So thank you all for coming today here that were present, and those for you participating online. Bye.